Hi everybody, I'm Walter Poleman from the Rubenstein School of Environment and Natural Resources at UVM. We're here in the Woodlands at Shelburne Farms with Dana Bishop. And Dana is the Natural Resources and Woodland Manager for the farm. And she's going to share with us a little bit today about really what's involved with managing the woodlands in here and how does it integrate with the whole farmscape ecology of this place and really their mission of education for sustainability. So Dana, can you tell us a little bit about the woodlands here at Shelburne Farms?
Sure. The woodlands at Shelburne Farms, there's about 400 acres, 100 acres of pine plantations that were intentionally planted, and about 300 acres of mixed hardwood. Some is more sugar maple dominated, and then there's kind of a ash, hickory, oak dominated. Different kind of forest stands highlight different species. It's managed for various things like recreation, obviously lots of walkers and kids, and there's a sugar bush, so one forest stand is definitely managed for sugar maples, and then the other forest stands are just managed for wildlife, and every forest stand presents a different kind of unique challenges, and we're managing for different aspects. One of our big challenges is regeneration, so that's a constant experiment trying to get new trees growing in each forest stand.
And Shelburne Farms has a special mission, and it's a multifaceted mission that's everything from historic preservation to educating about the future. How does those factors weave into your forest management concerns and strategies? So
one big project for the forest management is maintaining the historic landscape that was planned by Edward Olmsted. It's just managed so that, if you stand in this location, you're looking through that forest stand and that forest stand, and it frames kind of a certain photo. It's very intentional, very beautiful, but we have these forest stands, lots of these pine plantations that really frame the landscape. The tricky part is getting those pine plantations to regenerate as pine, or we often need to intentionally plant them as pine because the regeneration doesn't want to happen naturally. It's a very planned landscape, and it's also a historic landscape, so we want to keep it looking the way it is looking instead of maybe the way it wants to succeed into a different species assemblage. And so we're working really hard to maintain the historic landscape, which is sometimes not what it wants to naturally be. So it's a challenge, but it's also rewarding because we want to keep this beautiful landscape planned as it was meant to be.
Well, it certainly is a stunning place. When people enter Shelburne Farms for the first time, seeing the trees and planted in specific patterns on the landscape, and then of course the buildings that are interspersed among that, yeah. The agricultural fields. As you mentioned, this was planned by Frederick Law Olmsted back in the 1880s together with the Webb family. I've heard even that Gifford Pinchot was involved, the father of American forestry.
Yes, yeah. He was. He was involved with, like I said, with these plantations that were intentionally planted on these high kind of knolls that weren't good for grazing. So some of these trees were probably planted by Pinchot. So whenever we do a harvest, you always kind of wonder if that was the one that was planted by him or not.
Right. And what species might you be talking about that are not necessarily native to this landscape but were part of the planting pattern? The
pine plantations. Often there's a lot of these knolls that have these pines on them. It's a mixture of pines, like some spruce trees, and now there's like some maples and some ash growing in there as well, some oak. But it was mostly dominated, it was intentionally planted with white pine.
All right, I know that Shelburne Farms is interested in wildlife habitat, for instance, as well, not only on the agricultural fields, where they're managing for things like grassland birds at the same time they're growing hay for the cows. What approach do you take here in the woodlands as it relates to habitat for wildlife?
So when we do kind of our forest assessments and look at our forest stands, some of the things we're looking for wildlife habitat is that there's snags, dead snags, and we want those snags to be maybe 20 inches in diameter. So we want big, nice, dead trees for birds and bugs and everything. And then we look for down woody debris. We don't want our forest floor to necessarily be cleaned up. We want there to be down woody debris. And then from a kind of a bigger picture, we're looking at how the forest stands are connected, because the Champlain Valley in general is a very fragmented landscape. And so we're looking at, if an animal is in this forest stand, how does it get to the next place? And one project involved planting some corridors to let the animals kind of go from place to place, from forest stand to forest stand, and be undercover and feel safe moving. Often these corridors start out as like shrubby shrubby native shrubs, and then they usually transition into buckthorn, which is not a native species, but it does provide that structural habitat that animals want, that cover to go from place to place.
Yeah, it's great. You're managing for history, you're managing for wildlife, but I know traditionally forest management is also about timber products. And I'm wondering, what's the Shelburne Farms approach to that? Is there a market for wood that's being grown here?
Yeah.
And how do you work with that?
Yeah, so the forest stands at Shelburne Farms are, in the forest management plan, are divided into smaller forest stands to manage. So maybe, anywhere from 5 to 15 acres is each kind of management unit or forest stand. And so then every year we kind of think about what products we need from our woods, and usually those products are firewood, lumber, and then also habitat. So we harvest the logs, the trees, cut them into logs, and then we have a portable mill come and mill the lumber. And then we have a relationship with the Treehouse Hardwoods and Mill Shop. I think they're called Treehouse Hardwoods and Mill Shop. They're a retail lumber store. They have customers coming in for countertops, and they do some milling, or they can just buy the lumber and have someone else process it for them. And they say kind of what species they're selling and what dimensions they want us to cut them to, and then they tell us whether they want us to keep the bark on the edges or whether they want us to clean it up, and they would use it for counters, or if they're going to use it for sell it as big slabs. We also have a really good relationship with a log buyer, and they say, okay, this log you would make more if you use it as firewood than if you sell it to us, so you're going to keep this log. And then that log that's firewood is usually one that has lots of character with lots of knots and that kind of thing. And so then we can then decide, well, is this a maple that has a lot of character that's worth more as firewood? And if it is, then we can usually sell it to the treehouse, and then we make more than firewood value for that. So we have lots of different options, and it never goes to waste, and usually we can get pretty good money for the different products, as long as we keep our harvest relatively small. Mm-hmm. If we go too big, then the treehouse can't use it. We'll make too many logs that are low quality that the log buyer doesn't want, and then we get too much firewood. So we have to keep it all scaled to our needs so that we can use it most efficiently.
Great. You use this word character in describing wood. What do you mean by that?
So the log buyer wants like super perfect, relatively generic type logs for their markets. And then the treehouse is looking for ones that maybe have lots of like branches that came off of the log, and so you get this really cool kind of knots in the log, and maybe a lot of heartwood, a lot of that dark character heartwood. And so it's basically a log that isn't, high value, generic, beautiful for a clear white countertop or something like that, but then it has a lot of unique character for furniture making and that kind of thing.
Sure. So one person's defect is another person's character.
Exactly. So you just have to find the right person.
Yeah. And I know working with Beacon Parsons, who have a wood shop here, have really explored this terrain of building furniture with character, or even furniture with a sense of place.
Yes.
I was in their shop the other day, and they had building something that had tap holes in sugar maple.
Yep.
And it was just this beautiful piece of furniture.
Yeah, exactly.
So, we're standing in this forest here where there's just beautiful sugar maples in here. They're towering sugar maples, straight boles. There's a lot of sugar maple regeneration in here. Now, a number of UVM students, their introduction to this place is actually in the winter. And as winter is turning to spring, down at your sugar house, down off the market garden there. Yeah. What an exciting place, and what a great building. Can you tell us a little bit about the sugaring operation, how you manage for maple syrup here?
Sure.
At Shelburne Farms?
So the sugaring operation has kind of snowballed over the years, and that's just, I think, the nature of sugaring. You just want more and more, and you see how you could have more and more. So it's kind of gone from an educational operation with buckets and a few lines on gravity to more of a production operation. So we have about 2,300 taps now, which is probably all we need in order to supply syrup for the Welcome Center and Catalog and the inn. So we have a sugar bush that we manage for sugar maples, but we also are looking to maintain some diversity there. We did a harvest this last winter in the sugar bush and took out some really big red oaks, hoping to make some holes in the canopy to get some sunlight to the forest floor and get those sugar maples regenerating. But at the same time, kind of keeping some diversity there, which whenever you keep diversity, from a sugar bush standpoint, you're always saying, well, that's taking sunlight and nutrients from the sugar maples, but you also have to look into the future and think you don't want just a monoculture forest stand. And then for sugaring, we could have, this whole forest here tapped, but we just want to keep it to, what the farm needs. Kind of keeping, like we keep our forest stands to a harvest that we need. We keep our sugar bush to a size that's just what the farm really needs.
Well, I know that the sugaring operation certainly aligns with Shelburne Farms' mission of education. Mm-hmm. And I know that from bringing many UVM students here over the years. And I just wondered, any other aspects that your job as essentially the forester here, and how that links to the farm's mission of education for a sustainable future?
Yeah, so every forest stand really presents a really unique challenge and an experiment to try to figure out how to manage it and how to steward it for exactly what we want at Shelburne Farms. And we also have to listen to that forest stand to let it tell us what it wants to be. So the sugar bush has talked to us and said, definitely, it's obviously a sugar bush. It makes sense for its location and its forest composition. And then there's other ones that speak to more of like a red oak system. And then we think about how we're going to manage that. And then there's other areas that we could manage for sugar bush, but we want to keep it as a place for recreation. Or there's kind of a different forest stand that's more of an educational sugar bush with buckets and lines on gravity. So instead of kind of trying to go all in on the sugaring, we need to kind of make sure we're managing for education as well. That provides just as much value as a production sugar bush. And the wildlife, which is extremely valuable for everyone to see a fox running through or a bobcat running through. We need to make sure we maintain that habitat because that's what the forests are providing.
What would you say are the challenges that the forest is facing here at Shelburne Farms, and therefore your challenge as a natural resource manager?
I think that the challenges that the forests have right now is that they are a beautiful forest. You look around and you see these beautiful maples. And then you do see, right now, you see these small kind of maple seedlings growing. But often these seedlings are eaten by deer, or they don't really get the nutrients they need because of the worms in the soil. So regeneration to me is one of the biggest challenges. Like we have a forest stand right now, forest stands that are beautiful, but what's coming next? And that's not always clear. And so we do harvest in terms of kind of an experimental approach. Like we harvested from one red oak forest stand where there was no regeneration. The soil was just bare, no leaves, nothing. And we said, okay, what if we get sunlight to the forest floor? What happens? And we did that and nothing happened. So now we're like, okay, what's next? We need to plant this, or what are we going to do? And so it's a constant challenge and an experiment for each forest stand. And I think, along with climate change and just thinking, okay, what kind of forest composition is going to exist in the future? So we want to be managing for, oak or even black walnut, or species that really kind of like the warmer weather. And maples probably aren't the ones that love the warmer weather. So just kind of thinking about the future forest composition and also the regeneration, which they kind of go hand in hand.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess my last question is what part of your job brings you the most joy and satisfaction?
Sugaring.
You don't have to wait long for that.
It's just so, like I said, for the forest management and the harvest, it's just such a head scratcher. Like, why are the trees not growing? How are we going to get them to grow? What is this going to look like next? But for sugaring, you just are making syrup, and it's delicious and it's straightforward. It's complicated and tricky sometimes, but it ultimately you get this beautiful crop, and so that's what makes it all worthwhile. And
you don't have to wait for 10, 20 years
exactly.
to see the fruits of your labor.
Yeah, exactly.
You can
I know.
be putting it on your pancakes a little while later, or seeing the joy in people's faces when they taste it.
Yeah, it's very rewarding.
Well, this has been really informative. Thank you so much,
Sure.
Dana. And Dana Bishop, again, is the Woodlands and Natural Resource Manager here at Shelburne Farms. We're down here in the farm barn now, just below the woodlands, and normally we think about it storing agricultural products, but here is just a fantastic spot to see where the wood that has been harvested and milled is stored at Shelburne Farms. Dana, I just love this place. If you could show us around a little bit at some of the species that's stacked here and some of the character of the different pieces of wood, that would be fabulous. Like for instance, right over here, what species is this and what's going on with this stacking pattern?
This is a cherry tree, and we call this a flitch when you stack it all together, kind of just how the tree was standing. We mill it like that. Then you can use it with the we call this a live edge. You can use the lumber with the live edge for that kind of character. Or if you want to mill that live edge off, you can take it off and use it just as a board. But it just kind of leaves your option open and you're not wasting anything. And then you can see this board right here has this really interesting kind of seam in it. I mean, obviously that's a defect, but someone might really think that looks cool and they could fill it with epoxy and still use it for a table. It kind of just highlights the fact that this is was a living thing. And then we have other species in here. Over here, we have some taphole maple with a lot of character. You can see right here, here's a taphole. And then when you get the taphole, this is where obviously the hole was, and then the tree heals and you get a little kind of diamond-shaped scar around it. And here you have some more tapholes, and then a lot of character. So that's another kind of defective piece of wood that can then be used for more character type wood program.
Yeah. Boy, I could see somebody who's really into maple sugaring loving to have a table made out of a tree with a taphole in it as a conversation piece, among other things.
Exactly, yeah.
So that's wonderful. So this seems like it's a microcosm of the forest in some ways in terms of the species and their value and the different character and history that's embedded in them. What a fantastic spot. Thanks so much, Dana.
Yeah, no problem.